Hello and welcome everyone. This is Kiran Muthar and I welcome you in today's session about evolvement of cultural nationalism in India and Israel, a comparative analysis between Savarkar and Zev Jabotinsky. So this is going to be a discussion about not only two person or personalities, but also about two ideologies of Zionism and Hindutva. So as a student of Indian history, I read about Savarkar. I'm very familiar about the Savarkar's ideology and school of thought of Hindu homeland. The core philosophy, Savarkar's core philosophy of cultural nationalism is based on two important principles, which is land of forefathers and the Holy Land. Though Savarkar's line of thought was most prominent line of thought in the Indian politics and Indian philosophy. However, it is not surprising that there were many parallel ideologies which existed in the world at the same point of time. If I go a step further, some analysts even think that Zionist ideology has influenced Swatantraveer Savarkar's ideology of land of forefathers and Holy Land at a very much extent. Now, idea of Zionism also emerged in late 19th century. However, it was Jabotinsky who gave a clear shape to that idea in early 20th century. Israel was also founded on the core principle of Jewish homeland, which resembles the Savarkar's principle of Hindu homeland. I won't be talking much about this because we have our speakers who are expert in this topic to speak about this for the next 1 hour. I'll give a brief overview of today's program. So today's program has been organized by Pravah and Bharat Shodh Sansthan. So Pravah is the nationwide intellectual movement rooted in the Indian ethos and traditions. And Bharatiya Shodh Sansthan aims to provide an alternative thought process to the colonial ideas that were taught or that has influenced over last more than a century across the world. We will speak more about the Pravah and Bharat Shodh Sansthan at the end of the program as they are our host. I'll give a brief overview of the format of the session. We have two speakers, Hillel, Halkin. Hillel is a published author and he is also a biographer of Zev Jabotinsky. He will have 4 minutes to speak about Zev Jabotinsky and his idea about cultural nationalism in the topic. Then we will have Akshay Zog. Akshay is an engineer by education, but he is also a published author, written widely about Swatantraveer Savarkar. After Hillel speaks, Akshay will have another 4 minutes to give his presentation or thought about Swatantraveer Savarkar. And then I'll pass it to today's moderator, Lev and Shambhavi, and they will moderate the discussion around the cultural nationalism. Thank you. Over to you, Hillel.
Thank you very much. 4 minutes to speak about a man who spent 40 years as an active Zionist leader is, of course, not very much. I think, too, I should begin just by pointing out quickly that Jabotinsky would himself not have liked to be called a cultural Zionist, a cultural nationalist. In many ways, cultural nationalism was precisely what he was opposed to, in the sense that Jabotinsky did not think that Zionism was a movement whose job it was to impose any specific cultural vision or cultural version of life on the Jewish people. Jabotinsky really always felt that the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine was there to be an open-ended endeavor, an open-ended adventure, whereby the Jewish people would in time simply create whatever culture they wish to create and whatever forms of life it wished to create for itself. Jabotinsky certainly had no very specific cultural vision, Jewish cultural vision of what he wanted that state to be like. He himself was born in Russia in the 1881 in the city of Odessa, which as much in the news these days, but in those days, Odessa was really perhaps the most vital hub of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. And Eastern Europe was the most vital part of the culturally speaking of the Jewish world in those days. And Odessa was unusual in the Tsarist Empire for being a very open city. An open city for Jews too. It was really the only city in all of Russia where Jews were allowed to settle in freely, and where Jews mixed with others almost on a more or less equal basis. And that was very much part of Jabotinsky's upbringing, and I think very much determined his worldview, because Jabotinsky never thought of Jewish exceptionalism. He never thought of the Jewish striving for independence in a Jewish state of its own as being essentially any different from that of other peoples, Italians or Serbians or Czechs or any other European or Asian people, for that matter, that was seeking independence. And Jabotinsky really always thought of Zionism as asking the same thing for the Jewish people as other people had a right to too. Not asking for more, and not asking for anything fundamentally very different. Jabotinsky became the leader of the Zionist right in the early 1920s. Left-wing Zionism, which did have its own very specific cultural or political vision of what it wanted Jewish life in Palestine to be, had really been the dominant force in Zionist life until then, and continued to be. Jabotinsky was always in the opposition as a Zionist leader. The Zionist left always controlled the Zionist movement and controlled Israel essentially until the great upheaval of 1977, when the Likud, which is a granddaughter or grandson of Jabotinsky's revisionist party, came to power. So Jabotinsky always operated as an oppositionist leader, and basically always felt that the left was not politically militant enough, did not insist enough on Jewish rights in Palestine or in the land of Israel, kept putting other priorities such as socialism or various forms of cooperative life ahead of the goal of the Jewish state. Jabotinsky was very single-minded. The Jewish state was the only thing that mattered. Once that state was created, it was an open game. Jabotinsky, as I said, had no particular vision, or if he did, he certainly did not want to impose it on others about what that state should be. But there had to be a Jewish state. Without a Jewish state, there was no future for the Jewish people. And Jabotinsky felt that was the real task of right-wing Zionism, to keep Zionism all the time focused on the one goal of creating a Jewish state, and not to be distracted by other issues, cultural or economic or whatsoever. I don't know if my 4 minutes are up now, but I think I should stop now. So, does anyone want to comment on what I've said? So I don't hear anyone. Lev, אני לא שומע. I don't hear anybody.
Hello, am I audible?
And now I hear you. Now I hear you.
Thank you. Savarkar's thoughts on cultural nationalism. Basically, Savarkar based his nationalism on cultural, his ancestors' lands, the land on which their forefathers were living, then Holy Land. So Savarkar used that his famous definition of who is Hindu. A Sindhu Sindhu Paranta Yasya Bharat Bhumika Pitrubo Punya Gushaiva Savai Hindu Riti Smruta, means the this land between Sindhu sea and Sindhu river, which is was forefathers' land, ancestors' lands, or Holy Land, who is considered as a Hindu. And the Savarkar's nationalism is completely based on the person or people loyalty towards his nation on which land he is staying. It's irrespective of his religion, his sect, his creed, etc. So Savarkar's Hindu nationalism came into existence after the failure of the Congress Hindi nationalism propagated by the Justice Ranade. So the background is that when the Congress was founded, Justice Ranade's Hindi nationalism accepted by the Congress, but it was completely failed because its basic criteria was to keep aside their religious caste identity and get assimilated in the Hindi nationalism and put your identity as only a Hindi person or Hindi community or to propagate the Hindi unity. But the thing is that, as the famous Savarkar researcher said, J.D. Zogadekar, he said that only Hindu became Hindi and other people fell in that transformation. So therefore, when Savarkar said that when that Hindi nationalism was failed, I have propagated the Hindu nationalism to protect the just, civil, and fair rights of the Hindu people. It is completely, you can say, a reactionary nationalism to protect the fundamental or human rights of the Hindu people, because at that time there was a demand of the Muslim League to have the 50% share in the as a political representation in independent India. At that time, only the Muslim population was only 20%. So to give a representation to the community who was only 20%, but give them the representation as 80%, it is 50%. It is completely unjust to the other people like Hindus and all the other religious people. So Savarkar said that it is completely wrong and it is injustice to the Hindus' political rights. So therefore, Savarkar said that you will get the representation as per their population distribution. Everybody will get the equal rights, but there should not be any special privileges based on their population, caste, creed, religion, etc., etc. So basically, Savarkar's Hindutva is based on to protect and to protect the Hindus' political rights, fundamental rights, and to propagate the equal rights nationalism, and to create some harmony in all the religious people who were citizen of independent India, whether maybe they're Hindus, Vedic Hindus, Muslims, Christian, Jews, Parsis, or whoever is. So Savarkar's thoughts on cultural nationalism is, you can say in simple word, it is completely based on the people's loyalty towards its land of nation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Akshay. I think we have a good understanding or overview of Jabotinsky and Savarkar's idea of their cultural nationalism, or more towards the homeland. Now I'll pass it to Lev and Shambhavi to steer the entire discussion and evolve and understand this topic in more detail. Lev, over to you. You will be unmuted in a second. Yes, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. So I will ask Shambhi to ask the first question, please.
Yes. So basically, I would ask the question to the both of our speakers today, that the right-wing Zionists or and Hindutva national movements had different leaders during that time, or we could say parallel leaders. But how Jabotinsky and Savarkar became the pioneers or the fountainheads for for a nationalism in the countries like Israel and India.
Hillel, you are first.
Well, when Jabotinsky actually started out on the Zionist left or the center left, Jabotinsky first came to fame in the Jewish world during World War I, when he was living in England, and he conducted an almost one-man campaign on behalf of what he called the Jewish Legion, a Jewish military force that would fight with the British against the Turks in the Middle Eastern campaign, in which the British ultimately cleared the Turkish Empire from almost all of the Middle East and conquered Palestine, among other countries. Jabotinsky always, from the very beginning, was convinced, unlike the left, which thought that Zionism could come to power in Palestine and could create a Jewish state by peaceful means, and by means of developing the country economically and creating a common economic front between Jewish workers and Arab workers and so on. Jabotinsky always believed from the beginning that Palestine would have to be taken by the Jews by force. Not because he was anti-Arab. On the contrary, I think Jabotinsky in many ways felt that the left was extremely condescending towards the Arabs. Jabotinsky felt that the Zionist left thought the Palestinian Arabs could be bought with economic success, bought with progress, bought with modernity, bought with all the many gifts that Jews coming from Europe had, as it were, to give them. Jabotinsky said from the beginning, no, this isn't going to work. The Arabs are patriots. The Arabs love their country. They love Palestine just as we love Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Don't kid yourselves. In the end, it's going to come to a war between us and them. And from the very beginning, that was Jabotinsky's message. When he breaks with the Zionist left in the early 1920s and essentially starts a right-wing movement, it's about that more than anything else. It's about his conviction that the Jews of Palestine and the Jews of the world who are investing in Palestine need to create both a powerful military force in Palestine and need to create maximal political pressure on the British Empire, because without force, both military force and political force, there will never be any Jewish state. Jabotinsky was, in a sense, a great realist. He saw that force is behind everything in this world. If you don't have force, you may have justice on this side, but you'll lose. That was really always Jabotinsky's point of view. You have to have force along with the justice. And Jabotinsky fights for that continually throughout the 1920s and 30s.
Akshay.
Regarding Savarkar, when we talk about the right wing, so regarding Savarkar, it will be a Hindutva movement, you can say, a right wing movement. Actually, the word Hindutva is not founded by the Veer Savarkar. It was actually first used in textual context by the Bengali laureate Chandrahasa Basu. Then Lokmanya Tilak and Gopal Ganesh Agarkar also used Hindutva word in their respective periodicals like Kesari and Maratha. Savarkar's the main thing is that Savarkar has put forth its definition, its academic explanation in the book Essentials of Hindutva. That is the merit of the Savarkar. So before the Savarkar, right-wing or you can say Hindutva movement was also handled by the Lokmanya Tilak and Gopal Ganesh Agarkar also. They also took the side of the Hindus during the Hindu-Muslim riots in the Mumbai or Pune. But it was only at that period of time they have wrote some articles in their periodicals. But the Savarkar's merit is that Savarkar has give them some intellectual corpus of that Hindutva movement, that book Essentials of Hindutva, and his some letters and his presidential speech during his Hindu Mahasabha president as a president. So Savarkar's contribution not only as a active, you can say a karyakarta, on-field karyakarta, but he is also fountainhead of the intellectual Kshatriya, you can say, fountainhead of the Hindutva academical movement also. uh, through his speeches, through his books, and you can say nationalism or Hindu nationalism was existed before the Savarkar also. Like you can say when we say that Newton has invented the concept or the definition of the gravitational force, but gravitational force existed before the Newton also. But the Newton's merit is that Newton has put forth it in some specific definition in a scientific rule. So that is the merit of the Newton. So similarly, Hindu nationalism is existed before the Savarkar also, but the merit of the Savarkar is he gives some intellectual corpus to some academic textual context for that movement. That is the main contribution of the Savarkar, and at the same time, he's also active on field also through his Hindu Mahasabha, and that is that's why you can say he Savarkar is the fountainhead of the right wing or a Hindutva movement during British colonial period also and after independence also.
Absolutely. So basically, there were thoughts which were scattered, and Savarkar gathered everything together and gave it into academic context. Over to Lev.
I will ask Akshay and then Hillel. In our time, the political right wing is considered more traditional and even religious than the left wing. I want to ask if Savarkar and then Hillel will answer about Jabotinsky, if they were religious people, and if they were not religious people, what was the attitude to the role of religion in society according to Savarkar and according to Jabotinsky.
Yeah.
And I think it is best to mute everybody who is not replying. Then we will have less noisy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Akshay, may you start, please?
Yeah, just a minute. Just a minute. Yeah. Regarding Savarkar, Savarkar can be considered as a atheist. He is not a religious person. He has wrote extensively on essays or scientific temper essays. It was very famous, and he said that our Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nation should be based on rational thinking, scientific temper, and completely on humanity. He never said that my Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nation should be based on Vedas, Rutis, Puranas, or some Bhagavad Gita, Hindu traditional books. So in one of his letter, he said that let's not all not have any religion that is acceptable to me. Savarkar said that. However, I cannot accept that one religion like Hinduism, Hindu dharmic people is constantly being attacked by other religions. Be one as a Hindu or a Indians. Be united under one national flag. That's great. But when we get there, everyone should have equal rights. Giving additional rights to the one community while encroaching on the rights of the other means non-Hindus. This is not the way the national organization should work. I do not want this national organization to be a Hindu organization, but it certainly should not be an organization that oppresses the rights of the Hindus or other communities. And I will support the national organization which treats everyone equally, irrespective of religion, caste, and creed. It means the Savarkar has propagated his Hindutva movement due to the unjust, you can say, oppression of the rights of the Hindu people, specifically their political and social rights. So that's why Savarkar says that Hindus were oppressed because they were Hindus only. So that's why he propagated the Hindu Sanghatan. So when oppressive things may become neutral, it will be person to person vary. So I will quit my all Hindu movement, but at that time when that time has not yet came, so that's why when other isms, you can say Islamism, Islamatwa, Christianity, Judaism or Parsiism existed, and they were following their movement and their isms. Till that time, I will follow my Hinduness or Hinduism. And when all the other religious people quit their religious assertion and assimilate their all religious identity and assimilate into the humanity. So at that time, Hindu people will also assimilate their keep aside their religious identity and assimilate into humanity. So Savarkar's Hindutva movement is completely a reactionary to the that's anti-Hindu movement at that time before independence, and it is completely a protective, and it is a temporarily, it is a completely a temporary policy, and Savarkar's ultimate goal was humanity, but he was a practical person, so that's why he propagated Hindu people's Hindutva movement. So I think it is to propagate, or you can say to political consciousness, to encourage the political consciousness of the Hindu. It is the main aim of the Veer Savarkar. But he was never a religious person. He is completely a rational thinker.
So Hillel, it is to you if Jabotinsky was a religious person, and what was the role of religion in Judaism as far as he was concerned.
Jabotinsky, like
Hillel, can you
Savarkar,
move a little bit that we will hear you a bit better?
Jabotinsky, like Savarkar, was not himself a religious personality. He grew up with the knowledge of religion through his mother, through his grandmother, but he himself was always secular in his outlook. And at times, he was never, as a young person, hostile to religion, to Judaism as a religion, but I think he felt quite estranged from it. And his initial vision of Zionism was of really a secular movement whose job was to create a secular Jewish state. Slowly in the course of his life, he changes in some ways. Not so much because he develops religious sentiments himself, but because he begins to think differently of the role of religion in both Zionist politics and in a possible future Jewish state. On a purely practical level, when Jabotinsky breaks with the left, and especially as his conflict with the Zionist left becomes stronger and more bitter in the course of the 1930s, and it became very, very bitter and reached really levels of almost civil war in Palestine in those years. Jabotinsky reaches out for allies, and his natural ally against the left are the religious Zionist parties, who are both also anti-leftist by inclination, just as the left is anti-religious by basic ideological outlook, and who are themselves looking for allies. So Jabotinsky and the Zionist religious parties, by the middle 1930s, do create a kind of alliance between them, an alliance of simply of pragmatic goals and ends and working together against the left. But at the same time, Jabotinsky, I think, also begins to develop an appreciation of the role of religion in a people's life and an individual's life that he really didn't have when he was younger. And precisely as Europe in the 1930s becomes the arena of a terrible battle between two great totalitarian powers, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, both of which are hostile to the Jews and hostile to Zionism, and both of which are extremely hostile to religion. We forget that Nazi Germany also was anti-religious and anti-Christian in its fundamental ideology. Jabotinsky begins more to feel that religion, some kind of religious mentality or outlook, is perhaps the only anchor that can keep humanity from being swept into the kind of madness that totalitarian states represented for him. And he begins to think of religion as a necessity, not personally for himself. I don't think he ever felt the need for it, but as a necessity for a people if it is going to safeguard certain minimal values of decency, of respect for others, and of a sense that there is some kind of higher law above one, apart simply from political expediency and political ideology. So yes, Jabotinsky draws closer and closer to religious Judaism, more on a political level than any deep religious level. But at the end of his life, he really has reached a different point in his attitude towards religion than he started out with.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, Hillel, that, I wanted to ask both of you, but I would like if you answer first. Both Savarkar and Jabotinsky were influenced by Italian nationalism, or, the great patriot Mazzini, Italian patriot Mazzini. So basically, over the period, India and Israeli right wing has been accused of flirting with fascism before World War II. So, do you think this accusation are justified in any way?
It's a complicated question with a complicated answer. Jabotinsky himself spent 3 years, lived in Italy for 3 years in the late 1890s and early 1900s as a student. Or he was pretending to be a student. Mostly, he was just having a wonderful time. It was an extraordinary experience for him, and it influenced him all his life. Jabotinsky fell in love with Italy. He fell in love with its culture. He fell in love with its people, and he also fell in love with Italian nationalism, as represented by the great Italian nationalists of the 19th century, people like Mazzini and like Garibaldi, who were really nationalist humanists. Both Mazzini and Garibaldi believed in a vision of humanity as composed of nation states that cooperated, that each represented a culture, each represented a people, but that these people could live harmoniously together as a kind of world symphony, in which each people would contribute what it had to contribute within the framework of its own national state, which they believed to be the ultimate natural organization of a human society. That is, they believed that the state was the way in which nations express themselves naturally. Jabotinsky was an heir to this kind of thinking. He loved Italy, and he loved the vision of men like Garibaldi and Mazzini, and what he really, I think, in some ways wanted for the Jewish people was their own version of an Italy in the Middle East. When Jabotinsky was in Italy, this was long before the advent of Italian fascism. I mean, Mussolini wasn't even on the distant horizon at the time. So this was not the Italy that Jabotinsky loved. As fascism develops in the 1920s, Jabotinsky is basically repelled by it. He is always he's a man with a basically humanist democratic outlook on life, and he's a believer in parliamentary democracy, which was the system he also saw at work in Italy as a young man. But what happens with Jabotinsky is, as again on the world stage, this great battle between a communist or a socialist left and a fascist right begins to sweep all over Europe. Jabotinsky finds himself in some ways caught up in it. He finds, not because he wants to be, but because there is more and more pressure on him by his followers to follow an authoritarian model and to be the kind of authoritarian, charismatic leader that by his deepest inclinations he doesn't want to be. And so he founds a youth movement called Beitar, which is very, very influential in Zionist right-wing politics in the 20s and 30s, which in many ways, many of its participants are attracted to fascism. Not of course to fascism's anti-Semitic aspects, but to fascism as a system. Jabotinsky is never attracted to it, but he finds himself in some way swept into playing the role of a leader, of a duce kind of figure, of a charismatic authoritarian leader that he doesn't want to play, but nevertheless he agrees to play it in some ways. And this is, in some ways, one of the deep tragedies of Jabotinsky's life, that he is swept into playing a role that does not suit him really by character. He was a wonderful orator. He had great capacity, leadership abilities, but he never really wants to be the worshiped leader that he ends up by being. And yet, in some ways, of course, it's a useful role to play. As a worship leader, you attract followers. As you attract followers, you build a political movement. Jabotinsky wants to build that movement. So he lets himself be lured into playing this role at the same time that he's deeply unhappy about playing. And I think that, in a nutshell, is I say, the story of Jabotinsky and fascism, or at least authoritarian politics, right-wing politics.
I have similar question for Akshay also.
Yeah. Savarkar never supported or admired fascism or Nazism. Not a single sentence found in his collected volumes about this. And he never praised Holocaust also. On contrary, Savarkar always admired the Indian Jews for their loyalty towards India. In one of his speech, he said that the Indian Jews are few in number and not antagonistic to our national aspirations. All these minorities of our countrymen are sure to behave as a honest and patriotic citizens in an Indian state. As to the Jews in India, they are too few, have given us no political or cultural troubles, and are not in the main as a proselyting people. They will be friendly towards Hindus who have sheltered them when homeless and can be easily assimilated in a common Indian state. So the Savarkar is the first Indian who explicitly supported a Zionist movement in his famous book Hindutva. He says if the Zionist dreams are ever realized, that the year was 1923 when he Savarkar wrote that book. If a Palestine becomes a Jewish state, it will be gladden us almost as much as our Jewish friends. So, and he was very delighted when the Jews established their own nation, Israel, and he released a leaflet on 19 December 1947 and congratulated them in words like, "I am glad to note that the overwhelming majority of the leading nations in the world should have recognized the claim of the Jewish people to establish an independent Jewish state in Palestine and should have promised armed assistance to get it realized. After centuries of suffering, sacrifices, and struggle, the Jews will soon recover their national home in Palestine, which has undoubtedly been their fatherland and holy land." Well, when compare this to the glorious days in the history when the Moses led them out of the Egyptian bondage and wilderness, and the promised land flowing with the milk and honey came well within sight. So the injustice, therefore, the whole of the Palestine ought to have been restored to the Jews. The Jewish minority in the Hindustan too had given us no cause to suspect them. Hindu Sangatanized in Hindu unity people at any rate cherish goodwill towards and extend their moral support to the establishment of the independent Jewish state in Palestine on moral as well as a political grounds. So the Savarkar expressed delight over the creation of Israel as a historical important landmark in event of the justice and securing the rights of the Jewish people. And Savarkar also has some Jewish friend. When Savarkar was studying in London, he's pursuing his barristery. Uh, the first name is Sir William Rothenstein. He was one of his British friends who was a sympathizer of the Indian freedom struggle, much like the David Garnett and Guy Aldred. And William Rothenstein was born on 1872 and died on 1945. He's a he's from German Jewish family. He was an English painter famous for war portraits. He's also a printmaker, a lecturer, and a writer on art. And he helped the David Garnett in writing letters in support of Savarkar and raising the funds to resist the extradition of Savarkar from London to India. So, just a minute. So the person like a Savarkar, it is very saddening that and surprising as to how a person who had a Jewish friend and who supported a Zionist movement. He's the first person from India who supported the Zionist movement and who is also congratulated for the formation of Israel and admired the loyalty of the Indian Jews towards the Indian. He's accused of being anti-Jewish or advocacy of Holocaust. It is, I think, very saddening. It is completely, there is no reference found in his collected volumes or in his some confidential documents, his letters. No such kind of sentence found of that he was an anti-Jewish or advocate of the Holocaust. On contrary, he is supported the Zionist movement and he admired and congratulated. And he's the only, I think, at that time, he's one of the only few person who congratulated the Israel for creation of Israel after the so many thousands of years. So I think he's, you can say, he's a very best friend of the Jews and all Indian Jews and all Jews.
Thank you, Akshay.
Thank you. Yeah, for wonderful explanation. Now our Jewish friend would, take an interest to learn more about Savarkar. And over to you, Lev.
Akshay, first to you and then to Hillel. Thank you to both. Savarkar and Jabotinsky, they were against the partition of India and Eretz Israel or Palestine, mandatory Palestine. What was the reason that they were so much against the partition? So Akshay, you may start and then Hillel.
Yeah, Savarkar was completely against the partition of India because he thought that Muslims, or you can say non-Hindu people, can peacefully coexisted with the Hindus from thousands of years. So now in independent India, they can coexisted with the Indians also. And for that matter, he used some examples in the history periods also. So Savarkar said, but he has some criteria, or he has some rules to coexistence. That the rules are that everybody should be treated as an equal. No one should get a special privileges based on their population or religion, and maybe which are maybe caste and creed also. So I think my Savarkar's nationalism is also cultural and also territorial nationalism also. So I think that's the one of the reasons that he opposed the partition, and he said that partition is not a solution for any Hindu-Muslim unity or Hindu-Muslim some rivalry. We can guide them, we can teach them, we can educate them, and taught them that how they could peacefully live with us, coexisted with us. They will get freedom of expression, liberty of speech, liberty of their religious, educational, like madrasas and masjid and mosques also, and they propagate their religion also. But the only rule is that they should not be aggressive, and they should not proselyte other non-Islamic people. Same applicable to the all religions also, and it is applicable to Hindus also. They should not proselytize, or conversion should be stopped. Aggressive conversion, it should be. You can say Savarkar has made some you can say exchange of letter with the Shia Muslims, and they said that yeah, okay, we have admired the Savarkar's Hindutva movement, and we are ready to enter as a member in Hindu Mahasabha. Savarkar said that we will you keep your Muslim League party as a religious identity, and as long as Muslim League will exist, Hindu Mahasabha will exist. We will come together for any common minimum program, and we will make some coalition also. That's not an issue. and the Congress will be a nationalist party who will look after the all India people. So I think due to the territorial nationalism and to put forth before the world that Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Parsis, it means the Hindus can live peacefully and coexisted with the other religions also, as they live with in a history. And if we make a partition, that it will be a very wrong example put forth before the world, that Hindus could not coexist, or Muslim vice versa, coexist peacefully in anywhere in the world, or you can say in India. So I think that due to that thought, Savarkar said that we should avoid the partition.
Okay, Akshay, thank you. If you can put yourself on mute when Hillel is speaking. Hillel, I guess that Jabotinsky had different reasons than Savarkar for his opposing the partition.
He partly did, although listening to Akshay now, I think
Hillel also, if you can,
I think he also had some similar reasons, but I think it's important, first of all, to stress when we talk about the partition Jabotinsky was opposed to, it's not the partition of 2021 which would involve the creation of a Palestinian state in some 25% of Western Palestine. The partition Jabotinsky was bitterly opposed to was the United Nations partition plan of 1947, which involved a Jewish state on far less than the 75% of Western Palestine that we would have today if the country were partitioned, and in which the Jewish state that was proposed by the United Nations was of 3 different discontiguous sections that really didn't even make up a single geographical entity. But beyond that, Jabotinsky did not oppose partition as the religious Zionist parties did at the time, or as so much of the Jewish settlement movement and the undivided land of Israel does today. He did not oppose partition for religious reasons. Akshay has spoken of Savarkar's using the term Holy Land a lot for India. Jabotinsky never, I think, used the term Holy Land for Palestine, even though one often thinks that the Holy Land in international language means Palestine. He never did. And Jabotinsky's opposition to partition was above all geopolitical. He simply believed that a small, truncated Jewish state in Palestine would not be militarily defensible, would not be economically viable, and would not be able to absorb the millions of Jewish immigrants. This was before the Holocaust, the millions of Jewish immigrants in Europe who were desperate to come to Palestine to escape the anti-Semitism of a Europe under Hitler's boot. But Jabotinsky also, I think, shares this in common with Savarkar, as Akshay describes him. Jabotinsky was very, very opposed to any Zionism predicated on forcing Arabs out of any part of Palestine. In the 1930s, when there was a lot of talk about a transfer agreement, whereas the Arabs of Palestine would be voluntarily agreed to be transferred to other Arab countries in return for economic rewards and incentives in order to expand the Jewish majority in Palestine and to create a Jewish majority. Jabotinsky was fiercely opposed to this. Jabotinsky said, no, this is wrong. Zionism has no right to ask a single Arab to leave this country. It's their country just as much as it's ours. And Jabotinsky was also very, very firm about the fact that when a Jewish state is created, there must be a Jewish majority, but that whatever the Arab minority is, it must be given full political rights. Now, Jabotinsky partly allowed himself to take this position because he believed there would be a very large Jewish majority ultimately in Palestine, because he believed that millions of European Jews who ultimately died in the Holocaust, which he did not live to see, they would come to Palestine and create a large, once there was a Jewish state, and create a very large Jewish majority. But Jabotinsky, just as Akshay said, that Savarkar believed very much in the ability of Hindus and Muslims to live together in Palestine. Jabotinsky very much believed in the ability of Jews and Arabs to live together too in a Jewish state. And in this sense, I think they had as much in common in their opposition to partition as they had differences in other respects.
Okay, thank you both. Now you have a chance to ask the other panelists a question that Shambhi and we did not ask you. So Hillel, do you want to ask Akshay anything about Savarkar?
I would like to ask Akshay what he thinks would be Savarkar's position or attitude towards the Hindu nationalist party that is ruling India today, and whether Savarkar would feel comfortable with Prime Minister Modi and his politics and his followers, or whether he would approve of them, or whether, on the contrary, he would feel that in some way his own ideas and thinking had been betrayed.
Okay. Yeah. As far as his thoughts are actual thoughts are concerned, if you compare, there is some chance to accept his Savarkar's thoughts. It is very difficult to accept politically Savarkar all thoughts, but you can say this BJP political party, or you can say Prime Minister Narendra Modi, indirectly applying Savarkar's policy, especially regarding India's security policy, internal security or external security. They were indirectly following the Savarkar's policy, like when the terrorist attack during the Uri or Pulwama attack. So we reply with the air strike, surgical strike, which in history previously 1947 to till 2014-15 we never did, but the first time after that big terrorist attack in Uri, and then after the Pulwama, we hit back with the surgical strike and air strike, and it will be, you can say, a Savarkar's policy. And besides his security policy, also his thoughts on Swadeshi movement, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Today we have founded some Atmanirbhar movement, Make in India, Made in India like policy. All that policy, well, at that time when Savarkar was in Pune, and he made some bonfire of the foreign clothes during his education in Ferguson. So it is the same policy which has Savarkar propagated. So the security policy is Swadeshi movement, and also his you can say a Hindutva movement is also some partially they are following, like Hindus political, to encourage the Hindus political consciousness and to create a Hindu vote bank. That is the, I think, the merit of this BJP after the 2014 BJP, and especially Narendra Modi's merit is that they have used the Hindus' identities and idols during their all political campaign. They have propagate Hindu culture. They have promote all this Hindu ethos and all that. So, as per my knowledge, the best example, or I admire or praise Mr. Narendra Modi, is that they have slowly, but now will getting into a strong position regarding to create a Hindu vote bank and to encourage the Hindus' political consciousness. But you can say there is much more scope of improvement also. Lot more to achieve regarding Savarkar's thoughts, his dreams, his vision, especially in security. India not yet fully Atmanirbhar regarding our security policy in R&D field, but slowly we are developing in that field also. Progress, or you can say, is very good, satisfactory, but I can say scope of improvement. So I'm
Akshay,
partially happy, you can say.
partially happy. So Akshay is partially happy. Akshay, is there something that you want to ask Hillel about Jabotinsky that like popped
Yeah.
up during our conversation? Yes, please ask.
Yeah. Same question I will ask: is today's Israel Prime Minister or Israel political party following Jabotinsky's not all thoughts, but partial thoughts? Are they following some few points or few thoughts of Jabotinsky? Or
Can you find
not?
at least partial, Hillel?
Yeah. and if the partial, I mean, what exactly that thoughts?
Yes.
I think from Jabotinsky's point of view, let's go back to the Likud governments of the last 30 or so years. I mean, the present government, which may not last very long, is not a Likud government. But the Likud, which under the leadership of Menachem Begin and then under the leadership of Netanyahu, the Likud is basically as a party, a political party. It's the grandchild of Jabotinsky's revisionist party of the 1920s and the 1930s. That is, the child was a party founded by Menachem Begin after the founding of the state of Israel called Cherut, or the Freedom Party, and the Likud basically grew out of that and was the grandchild. I think Jabotinsky would have approved of his grandchild in some ways and been bitterly disappointed in it in other ways. I think Jabotinsky would basically have agreed that the Likud's militancy in foreign policy, its refusal to cede territory, its insistence on military strength, its policies, for instance, towards Iran I think Jabotinsky would have said, yes, these are correct policies. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, Jabotinsky believed in the necessity for force, not because he necessarily liked it, but because he thought this is a very cruel world. And this is a world in which if you do not have force to back yourself up with, you simply end up being trampled. Jewish people have been trampled too often in their history, and Jabotinsky believed the Jewish state was the only way to stop that from happening. And it had to be a state based on force, on power, and I think Jabotinsky would have approved of the Likud in that respect. On the other hand, I think he would have been bitterly disappointed in the Likud attitude towards the Arab minority in Israel, in its attitude towards humanistic values and humanistic culture in general, in its sometimes impatience with parliamentary democracy, which Jabotinsky was a great believer in. Jabotinsky was really a liberal, and in his deepest soul, and most of the early right-wing thinkers, and many of them in Israel, were liberal too, and so is Menachem Begin. But you cannot say that of Benjamin Netanyahu, and you cannot say that of most of the members of the Likud or of the Likud's parliamentary positions today. And I think Jabotinsky would not have seen in today's Likud a continuation of his views about those things. So the answer is, again, is mixed.
Okay. Thank you both. And Kiran, thank you, Shambhavi.
Thank you so much. I really gained a lot of information about Jabotinsky as well as Savarkar from both the speakers. I really want to thank you and Anay Zogekar and everyone who presented here today.
Kiran.
Yes. So yeah, thank you. It was really an interesting conversation. Something that is a striking thing came out of the conversation is Hillel mentioned that Jabotinsky, who is considered as an founding father of the right-wing ideology in Israel, was a liberal in a true sense. While he supported the equal rights for Arabs and Jews, he supported all the liberal policies. At the same time, Savarkar, who is also constructed as ultra right wing, or is also a true liberal in a sense, considering his democratic values. Both of them were influenced by Mazzini and Garibaldi, so I think it comes from their common root too. I think that this was a really interesting discussion. I will go to the vote of thanks. The program was hosted by Bharat Shodh Sansthan and Prajna Pravah. I'll give a quick overview of what is Prajna Pravah. It's a national umbrella that stimulates, trains, and synthesizes the individuals to recognize the inner strength of India with academic vigor directed towards the decolonizing Indian mind. So that is something what we are doing today. It's an alternate school of thought from the Indian history, and kind of an it's comparative thought in Israeli history that we are comparing. This comparison was never done before, but thanks to beautiful minds that are here, we were able to do this comparison. And we will look forward to host more of these events in the future. So I thank Hillel and Akshay for bringing their knowledge in front of us and educating us on this interesting topic, drawing a lot of corollaries between two parallel school of thoughts, and understanding us how their histories are very close to each other, are similar to each other. I also thank you, Lev and Shambhavi, for beautifully moderating this discussion, keeping it on track and making sure it does not go off the track during the entire 1 hour. And thank you, Prajna Pravah, thank you, Umangji and Chwanil, for moderating the discussion. And yes, how can I forget Anay? Anay and Shaya, you brought up the interesting concept, and that worked very well. So thank you, everyone. We'll come back with another interesting topic next time. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you.